You are listening to Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. I'm your host, Josh Lucas, and at Method, our vision is to connect technology with humanity for a simpler digital future. Join us as we speak with leading experts to discuss industry trends, best practices, and emerging technology that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences.
So I do really like this term, unobstructed wandering, because I do believe in hypothesis-driven research, but I find CX and UX to be this thing that once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you just live it everywhere you go, and you see opportunities for better UX, you see opportunities for CX. But I think it's something key that you said, Robert, is like having a framework to turn that into something actionable. Because I think a lot of times people can, and you even see this in research, where people will do a whole bunch of research, but they still don't have a strategy. I had this conversation with someone last week. They're like, we've done a ton of research. We don't have a vision and strategy. So I think being able to query that unobstructed wandering properly to turn it into strategy. And one thing I always like to look at is like, okay, if I'm going and looking at customers or users, am I seeing overt needs? Am I seeing latent needs? Am I seeing emerging needs? Like, am I looking for things that they have that aren't working well? Am I looking for like workarounds? My favorite, especially when I'm doing employee experience work, who are my users, is if I walk in and I see someone writing on a Post-it note or like a yellow legal pad, or I see Excel up on someone's computer screen for like an employee I'm supposed to be building something for, I know there's a product gap for them. And so I think being able to like really look around and sense what's a product gap in the market for folks as you're doing that unobstructed wandering is really important. I think the other thing for me is just being able to ask the right questions as a product manager sometimes, and going through and just taking the time. I think a lot of people just don't sit and think about strategy or talk about strategy. And we spend so much time talking about features. You said this before, Robert. And so, questions I like to ask is, what are the things that are going to impact us over the next 3 to 5 years? Like, what are all those market forces going to impact us? And this other one I like to ask is, especially when it comes to digital or when I'm working with a SaaS company, is imagine you have to walk in behind yourself and pitch against yourself. How would you win that argument? And so even if you're just a digitally enabled enterprise, if you're a retailer, it's like, what could your competitors do that would encourage them, a digitally active consumer, to switch to them? And I think just asking these questions kind of unlocks a different part of the brain of like, oh, no one's really ever asked me that. Because then I think once you've answered some of those questions, you've thought big picture, once you've done this unobstructed wandering, you can say, which of this matters? Which kind of comes back to the point earlier of like, has leadership really defined the problem to be solved? Which is why that's so important. There's a great book that called The Crux, which says, really nail what your challenge is. And then that way, when you're solutioning, this is the challenge. Here are action alternatives that we could take. And you start weighing those. So I think for this definition, it doesn't have to be a 16-week consulting massive project to define strategy, where you go talk to everyone that's ever used the product or ever could use the product. I think a lot of times it's emergent, it's in the organization, but just getting it down on paper, I think a lot of this you can put on a single page sometimes. And like, that's one of the things I challenge people. And honestly, sometimes if I can get people in a room, we can do this in 8 hours because they know a lot of this. And the nice thing is we figure out also what we don't know. And now we have a discovery plan because we've gotten to what we don't know and how it impacts our strategy. And it's just this kind of beautiful alignment of doing that definition. So yeah, I mean, I'd be curious your thoughts, Robert, other techniques you've used, like things you've seen work well, not work well, and actually getting people to execute this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something with asking those types of questions. I think this is part of why I actually I like the sort of jobs to be done frameworks, because it puts the question, it's often, especially if you have an existing product in market and you're trying to think about what should I do next? It's very easy to fall into the sort of inquiry around like, what do you like about this product? What do you not like about this product? To help me, and what you really are trying to find out is, why is somebody using it in the first place? What did they hope would happen when they started it? What is the thing they're trying to solve? Like, what is the problem they are trying to solve using a whole suite of products? Because that also gets you to not only think about, competition, but also substitutes out there, which can also come at you sideways all of a sudden, is that you realize that there's actually a pretty good substitute for the thing you thought you were making for all of your customers, and it's more readily available, or it's cheaper, or it's free. So getting a sense of like, what is the job? What is the thing they're trying to accomplish? I think, the other piece of that came, the Amazon question that is always done as part of their annual planning when you write your operating plan, your first version, is the what are the dogs not barking, which is the sort of question of like, what are you thinking about that nobody is alerting you about right now? It's not obvious. It's sort of maybe an emergent thing. Maybe it's coming around the corner. It's going to sneak up on you if you aren't careful. It's the sort of you don't have the dogs around the perimeter sensing it already, but something is out there. Like, what is that for you? And that also helps to frame some of how you think about the big challenges ahead.
That's always a good Sherlock Holmes reference in a podcast. So, I think one of the other things that we see too is like, okay, we've got this strategy on paper, and the immediate thing in the enterprise playbook is, okay, we're going to measure it. And I think the tool du jour right now is OKRs that we're seeing a lot of people roll out and write OKRs. I'd be curious your thoughts on the application of OKRs. How's it going? How are people using them in organizations? And I know you and I talked about this for a while when we were prepping, but I think how to have teams do measurement a little bit better of like, okay, we have our why, we have our strategy. How are we going to make sure that we are making this incremental progress towards it? And what are the ways for product teams to really start owning that?
I like OKRs. But one of the dangers when something gets so well codified as a framework is it's really easy to implement without understanding why you're implementing it, or what you hope to accomplish, or what you're trying to change by putting it in place. So the way I try to talk when I'm sort of working with new organizations is to talk more about outcomes before I introduce OKRs, because fundamentally, I think OKRs are one nice, pretty good framework of putting in place the alignment around outcomes. And because it has both the combination of, a aspirational and inspirational objective that is hopefully very customer focused, and then key results, which is how you will know that you have done it. Those are two pieces of any good outcome driven thinking. Is how do you state what you want? Can you do it in terms of, what in sort of a customer facing customer way? And then how do you know? So I think first of all, you have to start and sort of remind people, if you've got OKRs going right now, or they've been going for a couple of years, and is in some ways you sort of have to restate again why we're doing this, and that this is all about sort of starting with outcomes in mind, as opposed to output, and sort of less project oriented and more value driven. And I think that's to me the key is, if you understand the purpose and what you're optimizing for in creating these OKRs, then you can go and apply a nice framework of OKRs. It gives you some structure around how you do this and normalizes it across teams. And then it can, roll out nicely. I think it also becomes challenging when OKRs is introduced as the sort of science project of a singular team within an organization, and it doesn't actually create alignment to all of the different stakeholders, because that's again what you're hoping for is we have an alignment of what we're trying to accomplish together. And that is part of the formula of empowerment too, is, aligned autonomy. So you have, empowerment without alignment is just chaos, right? You need to have an alignment to what you're trying to accomplish, so that your business partners, your stakeholders, your sales team, whoever it is, can look at it and say like, yeah, that's what I'm chasing too. We're all chasing this thing together. And now I know why the product team is doing what they're doing in service of that. So it's part of it is just that alignment conversation and getting some version. I've been in an organization where OKRs were introduced from the technology team, never were really embraced by some of the leaders in the business, mostly because I don't think were ever explained to them what was going on. And so where we had great product managers who had good relationships and good collaborative conversations, we sort of accidentally got to aligned OKRs, because they had those conversations and they worked it together. But there were plenty of places where if you showed, the VP of this area what their product teams were chasing in terms of OKRs, they would be unrecognizable to them. They just weren't aligned. So having the sort of cohesion across all of the functions, if it comes to life as OKRs, great. But fundamentally, it has to be anchored in why we care.
It's interesting you mentioned that example because I've seen organizations where engineering and product have separate OKRs, and they do end up competing with each other quite frequently. But I think other things that I see, one, if you look back at the origin of OKRs, it's meant to be an aspirational framework. It's a goal you're not always supposed to achieve, but it's a measurement of progress. And I think for a lot of organizations, they've replaced KPIs with OKRs, and they really treat them more as KPIs. And I always love when people are like, "Oh, OKR is great. Can we write them into someone's comp plan now?" And as soon as you start tracking OKRs, it's not meant to be an individual thing. It's meant to be kind of a whole team thing that they can set goals for, especially in product, because a product person, an engineer, a designer, none of them can accomplish something alone. It is a whole team, function. And so I see, a lot of teams just write too many of them. They just have too many things going on at once. And I think it misses that point of like, what is that core problem we're trying to solve? Because I think when you have too many, a lot of them potentially are vanity metrics that aren't actually going to solve a problem and lead to an actual outcome. It's just, a navel gazing metric of like, yes, we've increased usage of this feature, but that actually doesn't have any inherent business value. Even some organizations that might use NPS, there's diminishing returns at different points of an NPS curve. And so if you improve NPS, is it going to drive a business outcome? And the organizations that have the best adoption of NPS show that correlation. It becomes this kind of organizational currency where they can drive that. I think the second thing that's interesting is, I do see teams with OKRs that are so high level for a product organization that they can't impact them. It's a P&L level metric, which I think is okay if it's, a VP of a business unit, that product is part of it taking on that OKR. But if it's the product team, being able to look at a leading indicator that they can actually impact is what they need to be able to look at. I know a lot of people like to talk about 5 whys with OKRs. I like to be able to look at an OKR and ask how 2 or 3 times and get to an epic or a feature. Or I like to be able to look at an epic or a feature, and I don't want to have to ask why you're doing that 5 times. I want to ask 2 or 3 times and get to an OKR. And like, that's the right number of jumps for a product team of like, okay, if it's 3 jumps, that means there's probably a whole bunch of other teams that are influencing this metric. And there's going to be a whole bunch of confounding variables that are hard for you to impact to make sure that you're actually hitting it. Because the farther you get from your feature of knowing what the impact of that feature is going to be, the more likely there's going to be messiness in the ability to measure that. And so, I think just taking it slowly, making sure you have the measurement, you have the baseline, and like hitting fewer outcomes that are going to move the needle for your business versus having a ton of goals and setting them and managing them means you're more likely to kind of to stay with it. And I think the last thing I'll say about this is like, your measurement framework is not your strategy. There's a great quote, which is, not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. And so I think really being able to look at like, okay, this isn't everything. To your point, the dogs that aren't barking, like there is going to be things we don't have data on that we still need to be sensing. And so having that strategy first and then setting the OKRs based on how are we going to measure our incremental progress towards our strategic goal is the way that they should be set. Not like, what are all the things we could be measuring progress on in this next quarter, in this next increment, so that the measurement, again, serves a purpose for the organization. It's not just an activity we're doing, because otherwise we're just creating paperwork for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, one of the things when I see that sort of activity is I try to really understand the root of why a team is writing an OKR like that. Like, what is it? Because it's very easy for teams to view this as a box they have to check as a part of their, quarterly process, and maybe it's a funding release or whatever it is. So they just go through this mechanism, but it doesn't really equate to how they think about their problem space. And so I try to dig into a little, like try to tether those together. Like, that should be The OKR should be a really crisp articulation of how well you understand the problem you're trying to solve and the inputs to the business that you actually have an impact on. And so that if they're doing an OKR that doesn't do that, it is maybe because they don't have the right kind of business fluency. They don't really understand how value is created in their business. And maybe they've never been asked to really do that. But I think that's another thing that we, to the first question, that we need to expect product teams to be really fluent in how this business makes money. How does the money accrue? What has to happen for us to be profitable? And then what are all the inputs to that? And which ones are in my wheelhouse? Because not everything will be. So revenue is a terrible metric for most product teams to be chasing, because at a large enough company, no individual product team is responsible for promotions, pricing, sourcing, all the different dynamics, the sales strategy, all the dynamics that go into revenue. But you're probably accountable for a product detail page to checkout conversion funnel. Like, that's a big input to revenue, and that's one you can control. So show me how you understand the inputs, and then make those your OKRs. It's like, how are you going to impact those inputs? And if they don't do that, it's probably because they just don't understand.
If I'm a product person feeling the way that you just described, where like, oh, I don't understand how money flows through the system. Is that, hey, I need to go, read some MBA type books? Is that, I need to go talk to finance? Who would you go seek out? Or is that kind of like an emergent exercise of like, hey, actually, if you take a step back, you can map the journey of like value, like, how would you advise someone to go do that?
I think it should be a core part of most organizations' kind of onboarding path, for both product managers. Really, I think everybody. Like, I just was on a panel for a boot camp that's training, engineers in underrepresented groups. And that was a question, is like, what would you advise that we try to do in our first, 6 months in our new job? And I said, understand that, be curious about how this business works. Like, you've been hired to be an engineer, you're not on the sales team, but just be curious and go make, if you're in a sales driven SaaS organization, go become best friends with a salesperson and ask them, how does it work? Like, how do you guys make money? How do you have conversations? What do your customers care about? There's just a lot of internal resources, I think, and just, raising your hand and being curious, raising your hand to your manager, asking for that input. And I think you'll be surprised at how willing people are to help you, because you may be the first, new associate product manager who's ever gone to finance and said, hey, can you break down, how we make money and what we care about? I think most finance people would say, hallelujah, thank God somebody is curious about this, and is going to apply it to how they solve problems.
Yeah. I mean, just because we have to get to know and meet new businesses all the time. So, even, going and listening to the annual, letter to investors, or like the annual press release. And, if you want to hear about what the business cares about, they're probably going to talk about it in that conversation, and they're going to share it if you're at a publicly traded company. But I forget where I read it, but someone said sometimes, there's not infinite business metrics in terms of like the end game. There's like 10. So it's not like a great mystery. Eventually it's going to ladder up to some form of revenue, profit, cost, or risk takeout at the end of the day, and you're going to have a role in one of those things. So I don't know, Josh, what are you hearing? What haven't we touched on here?
I mean, this is going to be a little bit more nuanced than, it's obviously going to be a little bit more outside of the pillars that we had established in the others, which is good, because I think we'll have a couple episodes that will obviously do deep dives in there. So this is just, I've kind of like the fact that this just feels more like it's just product talk. It's not like we have to nail this one specific thing. So I think we're in good shape.
Yeah. I don't know, Robert, we talked about a bunch of stuff yesterday. Anything else you want to cover off on here? Topics that are top of mind for 2024, what product managers should be doing?
Again, I think I would just sort of re-emphasize the fundamentals of the product team and the charter that they should have in an organization if they are, if they're asking to be in an empowered state, and they should be very internalizing the fact that they are held accountable for driving value, right? They're trying to get to value to the customer in a way that makes the business money. And so this whole like, value and viable charter for product managers, I think, is increasingly important. I do think that, a lot of product managers, even those who I think are skilled and understand that charter and know how to do it well, sometimes get starved for the capacity because they're pretty deep in the software development lifecycle and they're consumed with some of that. That's what I think is interesting as we go into 2024 and beyond, and to tease a little of the generative AI piece. There are a lot of opportunities to use interesting tools to make that part of your job easier. In which case, I then ask, so what do you do with the rest of your time now? And are you equipped to actually go do product discovery and customer discovery and solve those problems and generate the value, when the hands-on keyboards time that you take today could be reduced pretty dramatically with some tooling. And that's where I think we're going to have to start paying attention to, are product managers asking those questions of themselves? Are they raising their hand to ask for help where they feel like, okay, now I need some help in actually how to do this stuff? And are we as product leaders prepared to give them that guidance?
I think it's a fair challenge, Robert, because I do feel like product is being asked to do more and more right now. I think budgets, belts are getting a little tighter this year, whether it's in the enterprise. I think digital had its kind of 10 years of explosions where every company was like, no, we're not X, we're a software company. And now companies are realizing, nope, we are still the company we used to be in software as an enabler to give us competitive advantage. And so they're kind of reckoning with what is the right amount of investment that I should be making in this system. And so products asking to jump in on CX, they're asking to be more technical. They're being asked to be a little bit more commercially minded and business oriented. So it is a lot for the profession right now. I do love this kind of parting thought though of the unobstructed wandering and going and finding that and kind of finding these emergent needs and finding value. Because like just writing down, because the nice thing about our business is it's part of the job description is we have to learn a new business very quickly to be able to add value. And so if I was going to give advice to folks out there, when was the last time you really secret shopped your product, or like ask someone who's not digital to secret shop your product? Ask your parent, ask your spouse, to go secret shop their product, and then go secret shop a competitor. Really do a deep Google search on yourself. See if you can find reviews. See if you can find the Reddit page of people complaining about the company. Go to the call center. Like do a Y chord session and listen to some QA calls and listen to customers calling in and see what they're saying. Go into the store, go into a location, get the list of complaints out of Medallia or wherever they might be living. Pull that NPS survey. Again, kind of read that annual report. Even go and look at what analysts are saying about the company stock. If you're a publicly traded company, there will be little kind of tidbits of information in there. Heck, just sometimes Googling like, what are the trends in my X industry? Like, when is the last time you did that? How often do you do that? Reading the JD Power, reading the latest books, conferences. There are so many times to like interact naturally, and then it's really just learning to see the world differently of solvable pain points for the end user and being able to observe that everywhere you go. And I think it's really fun because once maybe not fun for those around you, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so you're always like critiquing the UX of everything you do. But, it's probably like going out to eat with a chef, I guess. But yeah, I think it's a really cool way to see the world.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that sort of discovery without a known agenda, that sort of like, I said, wandering. But what you're describing is also that sort of like just gathering insights from as many places as you can without already trying to reach a conclusion. There's a sort of a synthesis and a lateral thinking that I think is really important. It's sort of a root of really good creativity, is that like that ability to just synthesize and put things into a soup for a minute, and then out of that starts to emerge real clear patterns and insights, and will point you to something really meaningful.
Yeah. That's why this is the most fun job there is. It's just, recognizing those patterns and making a difference for people. So cool. Well, I appreciate it, Robert. Josh, as always, you want to sign us off?
Yeah, Robert, thank you very much. So Jason, Robert, thank you for both of you taking time out of your schedules to share your knowledge with our listeners. And again, go back and listen if this is a subject matter that you found interesting and you want more. We have plenty of episodes that you can go back into the library and listen through. And so we encourage you to do that. But thank you again, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. It was great. Anytime.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.